In this video, I am going to use a matrix to solve a system of equations. So let's write down our system of equations. We're going to start with x plus y equals 5. And then negative 2x plus 4y equals 8. All right, my first step is to write this as a matrix. So I'm going to write 1x plus 1y. Let's draw our line. That equals 5. Then I have negative 2x plus 4y equals 8. And then close off my brackets. Now, this is written as a matrix. In your textbook, on page 176, are row operations for matrices. Okay, you can only follow those rules. You can switch any two rows. You could multiply a row by a constant. You could add one row to another row. Okay? So, or any combination of those steps. So that's all we can do for solving these. Our goal is to have this in what's called reduced row echelon form. What does that mean? We want row 1, column 1, and row 2, column 2 numbers to be 1s. And we want these two to be 0s. Okay? Because this is the x column, the y column. So, this is already a 1, so that's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is, let's see, why don't we try to get rid of this? If I multiply the first row by 2 and I add it to the second row, that will wipe out this number here and make it a 0. So I'm going to keep my first row, 1, 1, 5. 1 times 2 gives me 2. Add it to negative 2, I get 0. 1 times 2 is 2. Add it to 4, and I get 6. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 plus 8 is 18. Okay, so far, I'm just going to change colors for my next step. Now, the next thing I want to do is I need to make either this a 0 or this into a 1. Well, why don't I multiply row 2 by 1/6? Because if I multiply, remember you can't divide, you can only multiply. But multiplying by 1/6 is the same as dividing by 6, so that's kind of a cheat way to divide. All right, so my first row, I'm not changing. 1, 1, 5. Multiply 1/6 times this row. So 1/6 times 0 is 0. 1/6 times 6 is 1. 1/6 times 18 is 3. Okay. Now, the last thing I need to do is to get this one, row 1, column 2 number, to become a 0. Well, if I multiply row 2 by negative 1 and add it to row 1, so I could say this, negative 1 times row 2 plus row 1. That's going to give me my new row 1. That's kind of a little shorthand. You can write down what you did. I could also write down here what I did in the purple. This is where we took 2 times row 1 and added it to row 2. That gave me a new row 2. Okay? This one here, what we're doing now, this is going to give me a new, so it will yield a new row 1. So that means my row 2 is not going to change. So I still have 0, 1, I have my line, and I have a 3. Close my bracket. So -1 times row 2, so -1 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 makes 1. So this stays a 1. Then I say -1 times 1 is -1. Add it to 1 and this becomes 0. -1 times 3 is -3. Add it to 5 and this becomes 2. This is now in what's called reduced row echelon form. What's really cool is, see, this first column has to do with X and this has to do with Y. So X value is, in the first row, is related to your X. Second row is related to your Y. So what does that mean? X equals 2. 1x equals 2, because see, there are no y's. So what's the value of x? X is 2. What's the value of y? 1y equals 3, so y equals 3. So my solution is the point 2, 3. Kind of cool. And see, you could also use either substitution or elimination to check this with the original system, and you will find the value of x is 2 and the value of y is 3. So have fun using matrices, and you now know a new method for solving systems of equations.